Hello and welcome to this video on the question paper for higher business management, focusing on the case study. Before we get started, there's a number of key revision resources that you should be aware of. Google Classroom is one of the most important ones. That's where you'll find all of your revision resources being posted by your teacher, as well as links to SVA past papers. But you'll also find in the classwork tab all of your work organised by topic. This means you can look for specific topics and revise them using the activities and notes that you've previously used in class. You'll also find links to things like Wordwall and Quizlet that might also be helpful. Another link that will have been put on your Google Classroom by your teacher is a link to the Achieve Learning site, along with sign up and registration details on how to get started with that. On the Achieve site, you'll find links to notes, descriptors of different topics, as well as some practice questions. You'll find videos that link to other learning, and you'll find links directly to specific past paper questions on that topic. Finally, the @LHS Technologies YouTube channel has a range of videos that you can revise with. These videos include ones like this, which will show you example and model answers of how to respond to past paper questions. We're now going to look at how we answer case studies, and look at hints and tips on how we make sure we meet the requirements of each of the questions.
Some of the key things to remember here is that you're going to use skills that you have developed elsewhere. Within English, you develop the skill of being able to read a passage of text, analyse it, and apply the content to a written question. That's the same thing that can be used quite frequently within our case studies. You only need to refer to the case study or the exhibits when you're asked to do so. And in order to make sure that you know when you're being asked to do so, it's probably a good idea to read over all the questions first, and whenever it says from the information provided, using the case study, or from exhibit 1, for example, do something to highlight that within the question so that you don't forget when you're in the pressure of actually writing your responses. That could be just to circle the question number, or in somewhere highlight the text where it says to use that case study. We're now going to work on a case study together, and I've divided this one into two parts, and I want to just look at the first paragraph to begin with. Pause the video just now and read the paragraph below. Once you've done that, you can restart the video and move on to the next slide. The question that I want to associate with that part of the case study is where you're going to be asked to look at the PR activities involved. And you can see here that we've got this bit of text that says from the case study. This is where you know you now have to use information specifically from there and not just from your knowledge of the course content. You're then being asked to justify the PR activities used by Nike. Be very assured that you're using the case study to look at what the methods of PR activity are that Nike have used, and then also apply the justify command word to it. And just be clear, when using justify as a command word, it could easily be swapped out for describe the advantages, because that's all you're expected to do. If you're justifying something, you're given the reasons for a particular course of action, which are all the advantages for it. Let's now look at the solution to that question. What was key here was that you needed to make sure that you referred to the points from the case study. I've underlined them as part of my response just to highlight them. You don't need to do that. So one of the things they mentioned was celebrity endorsement, and we've got to look at what the reason for using that was. So in other words, describe the advantage of it. And it's here we've got the mention of the fact that it's used to attract customers who want to mimic the celebrity. They also sponsor the NFL, so what's the advantage of that? It ensures that Nike brand is seen by a large audience. They offer grants and free sportswear to schools. That was part of your case study. So what's the advantage of that? It'll hopefully gain brand loyalty at a young age. The hope behind that is obviously if you're giving that brand to school children to wear, that when they're adults and making their own purchasing decisions, is that they will continue to buy that brand. And finally, they give donation to charity, which will improve the image of Nike. It's now time to read the remainder of the case study, and you may need to come back to this slide for reference for some of the questions that follow. So take a few moments and make sure that you've read the information thoroughly, and then restart the video. Before moving on to actually look at the questions, I thought it would be a good idea to go over the explain question and what's required of it in general, and then specifically in relation to the case studies. So the easiest way to remember this is to think about the three parts to your answer. Is the what, your joining word or phrase, and the why. So I'm going to give you an example. If you had a question that asked you to explain the advantages of having a varied product portfolio, the first thing to do is to tell me what the advantage of having that varied product portfolio is. And you can see that I've highlighted that here in bold, is that it can help to develop brand loyalty. You then need to consider why that is an advantage. And it's because it reduces the risk of failure. So now we just put this into a sentence using the joining word or phrase so that it makes sense. This can help to develop brand loyalty, therefore reducing the risk of failure. So we've now explained an advantage of having a varied product portfolio. If we then look at that in relation to our case study, again, you'll sometimes be asked to take that what element straight from the case study, and that can be a straight lift. And you're then expanding that by saying why something is an advantage or a disadvantage. And in the example below, if you were asked to explain the use of PR activities used by Nike, the first part of your response should be what the use of the activity is. So in other words, what is the point of using it, which is we covered in the previous question, and then why is it used? So you can see that I've started each response here with the same thing that I had in the previous answer. So celebrity endorsements are used to attract customers who want to mimic the celebrity. That's what the purpose of using it is. Why is that an advantage for us though? Because it leads to an increase in market share. And again, they sponsor the NFL, ensuring that Nike brand is seen by a large audience. Why would they want to do that? Because it results in greater brand awareness. And you can see those sections at the end of the responses that I have put in bold are the extra bits that are needed to be added in order to make it a true explain question. And each one of these bullet points would gain 1 full mark. So we now need to look at these 3 questions that relate back to that second part of the case study you've just read. So your first point of the question asks you to justify the out-of-the-pipeline promotions used by Nike. You have to be able to have read that text and recognise the out-of-the-pipeline methods that have been used. You've been asked to justify them, so you're going to describe the advantages of those methods. So you do not need to name the methods, but it does need to be clear from your response what it is you're referring to and that you're actually describing the advantages of it. In question 2, you're asked to explain the benefits of Nike's use of technology in its flagship stores to its customers. So remember, it's the benefit to its customers, not to Nike. And you're asked to explain the benefits. So there's no marks given for just identifying the methods of technology used. You've actually got to tell me what the benefit is and then why it is a benefit. And those benefits must refer back to its customers. They must be the benefits for the customers. And the final question is asking you to discuss the pricing strategy used by Nike for its Air Max trainers. So again, you need to look at the section with regards to pricing and be able to figure out which pricing strategy it is. Now the question is asking you to discuss the strategy. So in this instance, you can gain 1 mark for the definition and you can gain marks for advantages and disadvantages. Had the question said discuss the use of the pricing strategy, then there would be no definition marks available. These questions are worth in total 11 marks, and under exam conditions, those should take you 16 minutes to complete. So start the timer now, time yourself as you do the tasks, and make sure you follow all the command words and guidance given. So hopefully you managed to complete those questions in the time that you were allocated. If not, then that's a clear indication that you actually need to improve on your answering technique so that you can complete the work within the time allocated. So let's look at the solutions to the first question, where you're asked to justify the out-of-the-pipeline promotions used by Nike. And again, the text that's underlined here is text that I have taken directly from the case study. So it makes reference to the fact they've got sales or they've provided up to 70% off, and that can be used to encourage customers to purchase discounted items. The student discounts encourage students to choose Nike over rivals that do not offer a student discount, and the membership schemes will encourage customers to make repeated purchases. One of the top tips here, though, is that you didn't actually need to name the method. As long as you'd said that they could be used to encourage customers to purchase discounted items, they can encourage students to choose Nike over rivals, or that it can encourage customers to make repeat purchases, then that would have been sufficient. We now need to take a look at the next question that asked us to use the case study to explain the benefits of Nike's use of technology in its flagship stores to its customers. Some of the key parts to this question was in its explain. So you had to tell me what the benefit was and why it was a benefit. But then more importantly, you had to make sure that those benefits were to its customers and not to Nike itself. So I've made reference here to the flashy adverts. So what the advantage is to that customer is that it lets them to see the products in action. And then why is that an advantage for them? Because it results in them making the correct purchases. The use of the social media reviews and photos can let customers see the opinions of existing customers. That's what the advantage is. Why is it an advantage? Because it can therefore give customers confidence in the products. Then made reference to the use of the large interactive digital footwear tables. What the advantage is that it improves the customer experience. And why is that an advantage? Because it leaves the customer with a more positive feeling towards the company and their purchases. And then finally, we've made reference to the touch screens that can be used to custom design the replica shirts. And when we're making reference to this one, the fact that they can custom design the replica shirts is what the advantage is. Why is it an advantage? Is because it ensures customers receive personalised items quicker than if they ordered online. So again, I've made sure to put the bits in bold at the end of each response that actually makes this a full explanation. You then had to finally look at discussing the pricing strategy used by Nike for its Air Max trainers. Hopefully here you had recognised that the fact that they had distinguished based on age between the customers and the pricing let you know that it was price discrimination that they were using. And since you were asked to discuss the pricing strategy, there was absolutely one mark available for its definition. So this is where the price is altered based on a discriminating factor, and I've just put age in brackets here because that was a discriminating factor on this particular instance. The second point is that it ensures it appeals to different market segments. Allows for higher profit margins in some age ranges. However, there is the potential to lose some revenue, and I've just given the little example here about the fact that the materials used to make the cheaper child's trainers could have been used to make the more expensive adult ones. And again, just that final top tip, that because the question was asking you to discuss the strategy, it meant you could be given a mark for the definition. However, you do need to watch out. If the question asks you to discuss the use of the strategy, then you're only going to ever get marks for advantages and disadvantages. The discuss the use has no definition mark associated with it. Hopefully you're now gaining in confidence in the use of the information from a case study. So I'm going to give you this one to try on your own. I'm giving you a typical example of an exhibit that you could be found in your final exam or even in your upcoming FAB, which you're going to have to be able to refer to. And this one in particular is a SWOT analysis of Amazon. There's information here on their strengths and weaknesses and their opportunities and threats. Take a few moments to read through this before moving on to the next slide for the questions. I've listed the 3 questions that you need to answer here, and again I've highlighted in bold what the command word is. And I've also provided top tips for each of the 3 questions. So for question 1, which is asking you to explain the impact of the external factors on Amazon, you had to actually look again at that SWOT analysis of Amazon. There's information here on their strengths and weaknesses and their opportunities and threats. Take a few moments to read through this before moving on to the next slide for the questions. So for question 1, which is asking you to explain the impact of the external factors on Amazon, you had to actually look again at that SWOT analysis, and for the what part of your answer, you had to look at the impact of that factor and then go on to say why it would have an impact. For question 2, you're describing the ways of funding growth directly from the case study, so in other words, from the exhibit. So you have to be able to look at the information on there and basically pick out what the method of funding growth is. And then in question 3, you're then going on to describe the advantages of using that method of funding growth. Justify, describe the advantages. Now, these are worth a total of 8 marks, so 1.5 minutes per mark would give you 12 minutes to complete this task. So please make sure you start the timer below and try and complete the questions in the time given. I've listed the 3 questions that you need to answer here, and again I've highlighted in bold what the command word is. And I've also provided top tips for each of the 3 questions. So for question 1, which is asking you to explain the impact of the external factors on Amazon, you had to actually look again at that SWOT analysis, and for the what part of your answer, you had to look at the impact of that factor and then go on to say why it would have an impact. For question 2, you're describing the ways of funding growth directly from the case study, so in other words from the exhibit. So you have to be able to look at the information on there and basically pick out what the method of funding growth is. And then in question 3, you're then going on to describe the advantages of using that method of funding growth. Justify, describe the advantages. Now, these are worth a total of 8 marks, so 1.5 minutes per mark would give you 12 minutes to complete this task. So please make sure you start the timer below and try and complete the questions in the time given. This is one of the responses where the what part of your answer can absolutely come from the case study. So in this instance, the question asked you to explain the impacts of the external factors. So we know that the external factor was around COVID, and what the impact was the fact that there was a post-COVID boom in e-commerce. The why that was an impact, because it resulted in an increase in revenue from sales. We also know that there were low interest rates, so that's your what. Why did that have an impact? Because it could give customers more disposable income. We also had the threat of cybercrime. That's what the impact was, because it's a threat of cybercrime. And why is that an impact? Because it can discourage customers from buying online. There was an increase in online competition. Why did that have an impact? Because it can reduce the market share of Amazon. And the final point was, what was the increase in the minimum wage of workers? Why does that have an impact? Because it could result in a reduction of profit, or same thing, an increase in expenses. You were then asked to describe the method of funding growth, and that you should have been able to recognise that was outsourcing. So when we describe that, outsourcing is when an organisation pays another company to perform activities on their behalf. The final question was around the justification of using outsourcing as a method of funding growth. So again, it's just describing advantages. So the 4 points that I picked out was that it allows the business to focus on its core activities. Outsourced activities should be performed to a higher standard. It can cut the cost of staff wages. You could also have said it could cut the cost of staff training, but you couldn't get the mark for both. Or it can cut the cost of purchasing equipment. You could have also said that it can cut the cost of maintaining equipment, but again, you would not get both of those. You would get one or the other. So these were the 4 advantages that I chose because of the ones that I find the easiest to remember. But again, you've been repeatedly told, make sure that the advantages and the disadvantages that you learn are the ones that you're most likely to recall. So it's entirely possible you might have had additional responses to this question. Hopefully this little bit of practice has given you an extra insight into what is required of you as part of referencing case studies. And by all means now, what you can do is go back to past paper questions and practice some of those case studies. But please make sure to give them to your teacher for marking so that we can make absolutely certain that you're applying all of the principles properly.
Thanks for watching this video, and remember to use Google Classroom, the Achieve Learning website, and at LHS Technologies on YouTube to continue with your revision.